So this is part two.
This is part two. We talk about Pinky and the Brain and all those other shows and things. So, the Pinky and the Brain spin-off series was, I guess, a Kids Day mandate when Animaniacs got moved over. I guess they just weren't allowed to use Pinky and the Brain anymore. And a lot of segments on the Pinky and the Brain show, a lot of the shorter segments, I think were most likely produced for Animaniacs. They have unique title cards. Most of them have unique title cards and music. So maybe some of them were produced for Animaniacs, but also the third season of Animaniacs started having some original title cards and some original music. So unlike the first season, which just had the same few stock ones, so it is likely that these were produced for Animaniacs, but they just put them on the Pink and the Brain show. But also, the show was originally aired weird, with some Animaniacs segments being mixed in with Pink and the Brain segments. But I'm only going off what I know of the show now, which is used for all the show on DVD.
Some episodes being aired in like prime time, apparently. And I think that some episodes being produced or at least started when they were still working on Animaniacs. Especially for season one, it kind of creates a weird tonal balance because when you get later into the show, the animation it's more down to earth and more realistic, I guess, and the dialogue is more, I guess, witty and more verbal based and like puns and wordplay and stuff like that, more intellectual, I guess you could say. Animaniacs having wacky slapstick, like if you compare some of the early season one episodes with a lot of segments like a later season episode where it's just a whole story and it feels a lot more slower paced than more these actual stories and things happening. And it's like when we were talking about last time with the edge being sanded off when they went to Kids WB, and then you look at like the second episode, whatever, Pink in the Brain, and it's just completely ridiculous. And I'm pretty sure that episode aired in like prime time.
Episode had that Christopher Walken parody guy for no reason. There's also an episode, I think it's in season 4 of Animaniacs. The episode, even though the animations are kind of hideous for Wang, the episode actually pretty good. It's called The Party. There's a series of gags about Christopher Walken just being there for no reason. It's just not explained at all. But from my overall opinion on the series, I haven't watched the whole show, and the majority of my experience comes from randomly putting it on in the background on Tubi and the Volume 1 DVD with the first 22 episodes. And even though earlier on, the shorter segments kind of struggle to separate itself from the Animaniacs, it does soon find an identity of its own. But unfortunately, the identity is just not as funny. It's kind of slower paced. There's also the wacky slapstick humor, and there's more witty intellectual humor. We're not supposed to think when we watch shows. What is this? But anyways, even though it's sometimes funny, sometimes it's just slower paced. And I guess it's supposed to... Sometimes brain schemes are just more ridiculous, but it's also presented more seriously. I think some of the comedy of Pinky and the Brain, besides just their dynamic and Pinky's stupidity, was how Brain's plans fail him because it's basically his own ego / how ridiculous the plans are, him not thinking things through. But here it just kind of feels, sometimes it just kind of feels forced when they fail because it's just something just so stupid, it's the Brain's own fault. Which it is usually, but it just feels like it just wastes more of your time if the episode is extra long. But then sometimes the humor is just focused more on being weird rather than it actually being something funny.
I think that like maybe what season 2 of Animaniacs was missing was Pink in the Brain because there weren't any Pink in the Brain representation in season 2 of Animaniacs.
Besides,
and there was some.
Yeah, I don't think they even made any cameos or anything. And there's a whole entire Goodfellas episode in the second season of the Animaniacs, which was probably one of the worst packages in the whole show.
And there were a lot of, like, in season 1, there were a lot of shorts that were obviously made for Animaniacs with more of that style of animation and humor. So I think, like, it would have been better for them to, like, retroactively put those in season 2, or just keep those with season 2 and then premiere Pink in the Brain. It would help it more separate itself as its own identity by leading in with it being a different style of humor and animation, instead of just kind of trying to mislead you by having Animaniacs style humor and then just having like whatever was even going on in episode 2. What network did that air on? It was in prime time, I know that.
It aired on the WB, which I think was the Kids WB Home network.
I just really want to know, like, what happened. Like, were they asked to make the script?
I actually like that one because that one is just so weird and ridiculous. And the first episode is pretty decent. It feels like a Pink in the Brain episode, just kind of needlessly stretched out, but still has some pretty good wank
Kind of
animation.
like how like
And then you
Spellbound was. It feels like it has more of the Animaniacs slapstick and absurdity style humor that Spellbound had, except that
Spellbound.
Spellbound was actually better paced and had a lot of Looney Tunes and Animaniacs cameos. Kind of help it, but this time Pink and the Brain are forced to be on their own, so it's not as good as Spellbound. It still feels more like
Then you
Animaniacs
go
inspired.
to the second episode, and there's all kinds of
But they
there's like a whole
asked,
entire millions of stacks of papers about the sexual harassment law. There's a reference to someone cross-dressing for some reason, and the Christopher Walken guy they mentioned earlier. And combined with the ACOM animation being more realistic and down to earth, I guess, and the Animaniacs are trying to be all cartoony and stuff, it just makes it feel more weird, but I really like it for some reason. Then you get to episodes 3 and 4, which have multiple segments that feel like they're ripped straight out of Animaniacs. Then you go to episode 5 or 6. I forgot which one of them was the one with Brain getting the ridiculous false teeth.
it
But that
was
one was just
episode
so
6, I
weird
think.
and stupid that I actually found it funny. But then later on, it's just weird and stupid and not funny.
I think,
Like
I
the
wonder,
whole
like,
episode where Brain has an incredibly ridiculous plan about trying to get on a reality show or something. I forgot what the plan was. I remember the episode just felt like a parody. I'm not really that much in on the joke because I don't know what they're parodying. I remember, I don't remember really like the. I remember an episode of the Pink and the Brain show with Pinky joining the Beatles or something. I've got the only reason I remember it is because of a Yoko Ono parody that kept doing this horrifying banshee screeching. It's like the most annoying thing ever. I don't know why I thought that was funny and why I thought it needed to be repeated like 5 times after the episode. I know it's supposed to be a parody of how she actually sung, but it's just so annoying and horrible. Why I didn't think that was funny.
it's all right.
Please stop.
I wonder, like, when they made the second episode, where did they tell them they were gonna give Pink in the Brain this big marketing push premiere by having the second episode be prime time? So they were asked to make it more raunchy, or did they just like I don't? I kind of want to know like what was going on when they made that episode, and I'm pretty sure that was the only one out of this whole Animaniacs universe franchise that had a primetime premiere like that. So I mean, nothing in like the real series really came close to what happened in that episode. Well, I mean, it really isn't anything too crazy, but nothing else really came close to having that sort of content besides like the Fox Kids era of
Or
the reliable
maybe
Animaniacs.
Or maybe it was like originally developed as a primetime show, and maybe they just knew they wanted to have a different tone to make it to not just make it feel like they were just getting more of the same stuff. They would be getting an Animaniacs if they stayed. But one of the things they actually do like about the Pink and the Brain series is they give Brain a backstory with Snowball. I haven't seen all of the episodes yet. I've seen the first two, and they're pretty good episodes, even though the first one's animated by Acom, and they have their and well, animation by Acom on Pink and the Brain is actually better than some of the stuff they're putting out on Animaniacs by this point, which was also upgraded. But the Pink and the Brain stuff by Acom looks pretty good. But even though the second Snowball episode has the Hearts of Twilight guy appearing again, and it's just not as funny with not as good animation, and even though it is kind of drawn out in places, I feel I still think that it ended up being good.
Also, something that I think I said, I don't know if he even elaborated on it. I think I said I was going to elaborate on it later on. Is that I do highly prefer Pinky's first deeper voice versus the higher pitched one later on. I just find it more appealing, and sometimes he just kind of gets annoyed with him screaming and crying all the time and just being an idiot and annoying. Especially in the Pink the Rain series where it's like 20 minutes, so you have to deal with that. Um, Usually it doesn't really like hinder any episodes, but I think that with like the Pink and the Rain series, you always know what's gonna happen, and even if there's usually like the episodes don't really have like a good story, like the plan, Brain's ridiculous, stupid, idiotic, moronic plan is basically the whole story, and the plan themselves usually aren't interesting or elaborate enough to where it feels like that they needed to be 20-minute stories, which you can kind of tell because later on they had shorter segments, but they didn't use the shorter segment length to have like a faster pace like they would have on Animaniacs. It's still the same kind of dialogue-driven humor, but this time it's shorter, so the plan can be dumber and fail quicker.
So basically, picking the main series, I think
I
that
don't think
some
I'll
of the
ever
more
choose.
Animaniacs inspired segments. I think that the show was better earlier on. It was the mix of Animaniacs inspired segments combined with that stupid episode with Brain getting the false teeth and the whole entire ridiculousness of the second episode with the microwave powder, whatever the hell was going on. But I think that stuff earlier on was pretty good. And one other episode I remember was a Robin Hood parody episode. I remember liking that one.
I think that like sometimes, like with the Robin Hood episode, I remember really liking that one. Even though it's shorter, it's kind of like a take on a pop culture thing. So Brain doesn't really have to have a plan. Like ones where they put them in historical time periods and stuff. Well, I mean, there was also the one with like the printing press or whatever, with the sausages and the gum or whatever it was. We can
Also, the
basically have like,
Napoleon episode and Spellbound, if you count that.
yeah, well, in like Napoleon episode and the Robin Hood one, you can take a basic place in like that's popularly known in like history and basically kind of change it so that Brain takes over the world without having to come up with like an original story, an original plan. So that way it's easy to just come up with gags. But other times I feel like the episodes focus more on the plan itself without leaving room for any actual like good comedy. So yeah, I feel like that sometimes the focus is more on like the plan itself, and when the plan isn't interesting or like really makes that much sense, then it just gets kind of just not really that good. And one episode I remember, well, I think it was called Fly, which is like a really weird and lazy title, but I think it was about trying to get like a spaceship or something, which is one where I do not remember the storyline at all, but I remember the Jimmy Brain coffee mug and them getting into space suits and the really angry like control tower guy talking about the icing being ice cold on his toaster pastry or whatever the hell he was talking about. I remember that specifically for some reason. So it
Also,
really
I
tells that
liked.
I could that episodes can be really memorable if they have good comedy, but most of the time the comedy isn't really like memorable.
Well, it isn't. I don't. Well, Fly is kind of funny in places, but But basically only those parts that you mentioned are the only ones that stick out to me for how funny they are. I also one of the episodes I really like was Around the World in 18 Hours, which takes place in the 1800s. The ACOM animation is actually pretty decent, and it's just a pretty fun episode. It's another one with a different time period, and it's obviously a parody of Around the World in 80 Days. But I think that since there's a historical, the story is really basically like if they base it off a historical event or take it back in time, the story is probably basically already pre-planned out for them. They just have to come up with a bunch of stuff for Pink and the Brain to do, and I think that is where they're at their best. And actually, that's probably where they're at their best in the actual real show, where they base it off of some kind of past event or put them in a time period. There's always pretty fun ones because the story's basically already
Or
laid out. They
ones
just have
that
to
were
come
more
up with the dialogue and stuff.
or ones so basically more and ones that are more conceptual, like the time travel one was one of my favorites from the original series. So ones that were like based off like historical time periods or pop culture things or just more conceptual ones that are more about that, because the ones that are about Brain trying to actually execute a plan were usually the weaker ones. But at least in Animaniacs, they had some tighter animation and humor. But here, with the slower paced dialogue humor, which didn't always work, because sometimes they made Pinky too stupid and too annoying, and sometimes the Brain was basically kind of too much of an asshole. But this wasn't really that much of a problem. It
Well,
was
not
only just
here
kind of,
anyway. That's more in the reboot.
yeah. It's like after seeing like so many times of Brain's plans being so stupid and him just missaying something and then Pinky interprets it too literally, and that's basically like in most of the episodes it's Brain's own stupid fault. So I think, and yeah, some episodes just aren't that good, and I think that, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that's better off not existing because there are some good episodes, but I don't really think.
Well, the
Uh,
best thing, or one of the best things to come out of the Pinky the Brain show was the Christmas episode. It's the only thing in the Pinky the Brain show that was animated by TMS, and it's pretty great. Unlike the other ones that are full episodes, this one doesn't feel like it's unnecessarily stretched out. They actually had a story that's planned out, and it's also one of the emotional moments that work because you actually know about Pink and Brain's dynamic, so it doesn't. You actually know about the full extent of their dynamic, which is established in other episodes and in this episode, so it doesn't feel entirely forced when the ending comes up. It's actually emotional. So even if the rest of the series didn't exist, now I think I'll be happy with basically just having this. And maybe some of the smaller segments repurposed, or maybe some of the longer ones repurposed in the Animaniacs episodes. But a little bit cut down because some of them could be drawn out at points.
I think that also they mentioned Pink in the Brain and Larry, which was probably like one of the most popular segments where the network wanted to force them to create a new character. So they just created a segment with this random new character as a parody of Larry from the Three Stooges. And it
Also, they
just,
put him in the theme song very horribly and obviously. And I think that if you just didn't have any context for that, it probably wouldn't be as funny. But maybe it would be funny in the aspect that they're just some random character who just appears for that one episode and then a cameo at the very end for 2 seconds in the Pig and the Family Reunion special. But it's funny in that way. But if you know the behind the scenes story, it just makes it even funnier that they just invented this character to show them how incredibly stupid the idea was.
so I think that that's probably one of the better ones. This is one of the more conceptual ones, and also is a bit more meta. I think that that's something that it also kind of lost when it went to the full series. The Animaniacs, well, I guess like every other segment besides Pinky and the Brain was more aware of pop culture. I think that like the Pinky and the Brain series is probably more aware in doing parodies and stuff in
Alright,
comparison to when they were on Animaniacs, which I guess
since
made
you're
sense because
comparing Pinky and the Brain to other segments, not Pinky and the Brain feel the least like classic Looney Tunes characters out of all of them. So aside from the fact they have their own spin-off show, it just separates them even more from the rest of the cast. When the rest of them, the Warners feel like well they technically were created as black and white cartoon characters, being all zany and stuff. Slappy Squirrel is literally an overtime cartoon star. The Buns and Mindy is like a classic formula. The Goodfeathers are just random movie parody characters, like basically all of them for like things you would probably see if the only just cartoons are made today. Maybe. Which is basically what this is. But Pink in the Brain, maybe they'll be like for one short, but Pink in the Brain doesn't like feel that much like a classic just cartoon, which I think is that Animaniacs apart from Looney Tunes, which it wasn't trying to be like a replacement, trying to be like a new version.
so overall, I think that the show is fine. I think that Pink in the Brain works a lot better in shorter, fast-paced segments where you get more of the character dynamics. But I feel like that in some of the larger scale episodes, the story and the scheme itself takes over too much of the comedy to the point where the character dynamics aren't really that fun when you stretch them out to 20 minutes, and they're better in like short little 7-minute bursts every couple of episodes on Animaniacs than they are in their own show. And even like some of the earliest season one episodes where there's multiple segments, even those are more enjoyable. So I don't know. I think that if they did go to series, I don't know. Maybe I'd be saying something different if it's actually how it was. But I think I prefer just having a whole series of Animaniacs style segments. But maybe then it will get tiring. I understand they had to do something different to make it distinguishable as a spinoff, but I don't really think that's like a worthwhile thing on its own.
As for my opinion on the show, as you said, it's fine. Not really a worthwhile thing on its own. There's some things I like from it, especially earlier on, but after that, it just gets kind of tiring to see the same thing over and over, especially considering how it's obviously very different from what came in Animaniacs, and it's just not as good in my opinion. But next, I suppose they're going to talk about Freakazoid because not counting the Looney Tunes, the specific Looney Tunes based stuff that what comes on next. So my opinion on Freakazoid is that I have like the least amount of idea of what to think about it possible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the times, it just feels like they're just making something just to make something, and not really thinking about whether or not anyone would even like it. Just worrying about if they would like it, and I don't think they even had the approval of the whole crew to like it. They probably just let the writer or whoever, just someone just thought of something they thought would be funny, and they just put it in just randomly. It's just a whole entire collection of just things, and some of it works, some of it doesn't, a lot of it doesn't. A lot of it just feels really random, like just a lot of it just feels like references to stuff that is just random. Like in the season 2 premiere episode, they have a whole entire extremely unnecessarily extended Hello Dolly uh musical sequence parody thing, and it would be kind of funny on its own, but it's just so overlong in an episode that's already overlong, and it's so oddly specific with them having scrolling names at the bottom, them specifically referencing a PBS broadcast where they showed the people who donate the money scrolling to the bottom of the screen. I don't know who they thought they would appeal to, who would even get that. But also, the episode just has just there's a part in the beginning of the episode where Dexter gets dropped off for his date at a restaurant, and they repeatedly show Dexter's mom saying "Have a good time now." It's just not funny. It's just confusing more than anything. So I don't know what they were. Like some of this stuff works. Like sometimes in the first season, some of the stuff works, like the Batman and Robin fat version parodies, which features Scott Menville as one of the voices. I think because it sounds exactly like him. So yeah, if we picked that. But some of the stuff, especially in season 2, where the episodes get more extended, just doesn't really work at all. And some of the stuff is just drawn out.
Because in my opinion is that it's basically the same thing. And some things, like some of the references they put in the show, it kind of reminds me of the Angry Beavers, like how sometimes they just put in random inside jokes and references and just random things in the background and stuff that they knew that only they would understand. And I think that there's kind of something.
Well, Mitch Sauer also
Who's
worked
the
on Freakazoid.
producer? He designed the horrifying Emmett Nerver and whatever the hell his name is. Pretty sure he designed it, and he was a producer on the show.
Yeah, I guess that kind of explains it. But the difference with the Angry Beavers is that besides besides like the random B movie parody episode, which is still funny, even if you don't get all like the specific references they're making. With the Angry Beavers, that stuff was more in the background, and if it was in the forefront, it was like a more general reference, so you don't have to know the specific thing. With Freakazoid, it seems like they just reference things extremely specifically, like I previously mentioned the scrolling name thing with the PBS donations and stuff. It seems like they just reference extremely specific things, and even though Tiny Toons did that sometimes, it was never as overt as this, where they just reference extremely specific things that just aren't really that funny, and the show just feels like random overall.
I think that this is kind of. I think that this is probably like what the promos made Animaniacs look like, and what people thought Tiny Toons would be like back then. Just like a bunch of just like things happening randomly, and like they don't really give you a reason to care about like the characters. Well, not that I really need that, but like with Animaniacs and even Tiny Toons and even Pink in the Brain, they give you actual like character dynamics. Obviously, there's a wacky, silly, goofy characters getting into slapstick antics and such. But even in Animaniacs, they give you reasons to care about the characters, have connections to each other. So you actually like give them a reason to care. But every segment in Freakazoid is just so ridiculous and so random. There's absolutely no reason to really care about anything. And sometimes, I mean, there's some like episodes that I remember, but there are more episodes that I just don't. They're more like random. There's like one of those shows where I remember more little gags and moments rather than any actual like storylines or really
I
anything.
haven't, I haven't watched the show in a long time. Well, not a long time. I would say like a few months, which is basically like a long time because my brain has horrible memories. But I don't remember. I remember a couple moments, but not any of them that I could really say that I really liked, or any specific episodes that I liked, or any really specific things that I specifically Like I liked David Warner as the Loeb, I can say that. But that's basically like the only thing that I like, really remember me liking. I also remember me liking the Chip origin story 4-parter episode. I remember liking that. But that's
I think
I don't
that's like
remember
the
anything
only
about that, but
episode.
that's the only thing that I really remember from the show.
I think that's like basically the only time it gives the actual story and plot to actually care about the characters. And maybe this was like a part of some kind of elaborate joke, but why didn't they put that episode first? I guess like the Dance of Doom, whatever the first episode's called. I guess that more establishes like the basic tone of the show. I guess that establishes it more, so then they can get into the origin story. It's because they can put this like a little preview or whatever. But I think that like a lot of studios do that.
Well, in my opinion,
Doesn't.
Freakazoid just was basically made only for just the crew. They didn't think about whether or not it appealed to everyone else in the crew, just to a couple few people specifically. And Freakazoid didn't have a lot of episodes. I think season one. I don't know. I know season one had more episodes than the second. I think season two was like 11 episodes, and season one was 13. But since it was just so random with no sense of like any or no sense of specific style or anything, like even Animaniacs, you know what the style of what like there's kind of style, some kind of order with stuff, some kind of reason for the way the segments are organized and stuff. There's no specific length for any Freakazoid segment. The Freakazoid segments are just random all over the place. They just put in randomly. It just seems like a bunch of stuff they had made. They just put in. Season 1 was only 13 episodes instead of Animaniacs' original 65, which is like a fifth of the amount of episodes. So Freaks didn't have enough time to really and truly establish the type of style they're going for, which I think really hurt it. Then the drastic overturn in the second season, where I guess they tried to make things more serious by having the episodes be a full 20 minutes, but actually it just made the stories even more drawn out. And since Freakazoid is a silly show, trying to automatically make it more serious to make the drawn out stuff even more drawn out. That was already drawn out when the segments were shorter. So overall, Freakazoid is just sometimes good, most times not. Probably not ever gonna like binge it or anything. Do you have anything more you want to say about Freakazoid?
So basically, I think that the main thing is that it could be really funny at sometimes, but also really just like not funny at sometimes. And I think that there's a lot of people who want a revival of Freakazoid, but I don't think it's gonna happen with like the Cosgrove actor passing away. I think that Cosgrove is probably the best part of the show, but
Also,
I don't
David
think this
Warner passed away, but they did make that Teen Titans Go episode.
that had both of them before they passed.
But they couldn't get him to cameo in the anime actually, but somehow.
Like maybe there's like rights licensing things going on.
Well, to be rights licensing for a show that they made, you know.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I think that sometimes like the jokes just go on for too long and they just kind of distract from the story, which is really weird because sometimes this happens even in the shorter segments, which doesn't even make sense because they can control that. But I think that the the more specific, like drawn out humor and stuff, that was kind of reined in on Animaniacs because they had like a bunch of other writers and had characters to stick to. Freakazoid is basically a blank slate of a character they can basically just do anything with. So they can just basically do any kind of humor they want. And some episodes, well, I don't think that like Freakazoid himself really has like an enjoyable like personality that you want to watch. And I don't think that there really needs to be a Freakazoid revival or whatever, considering how many shows basically occupy the same kind of humor, like Teen Titans Go with its obscure references. And I guess like Family Guy goes fit into that
Like
too.
obscure
And
references by name to Webster and Small One at the point of searches that the kid audience in 2010 is gonna get.
in the amazing classic Back at the Barnyard, I don't think they really did specific references on that.
I
It was just like
think
really absurd and just ridiculous and
I
nonsense.
think that Freakazoid would probably maybe be like a good comic book revival. But I don't think it needs a show revival because the show doesn't really like look like it has anything that needs to be revived. So I understand if people want other shows to be revived, like Teen Titans, which had a horrible finale. But this Freakazoid barely even had enough potential for this series when it first was made. So I don't understand why they feel the need to
I
have
think
Freakazoid
that like
revival.
early on
Because
in
I don't really see like a huge Freakazoid community or anything. So I don't understand why people want a Freakazoid revival. Maybe because of the way it got canceled with figures with the time slots being shifted around and making low ratings. Maybe they're doing that because they knew the show wasn't that good. So, I don't know. Maybe this type of humor appeals to all the Freakazoid fanatics out there, but for me personally, it's just not that good.
But I think that like early on in development, it was being developed by Bruce Timm as a more serious superhero show. But then Warner Bros. Decided that they wanted something more comedic like Animaniacs, which is, I mean, by this time, well, I think Batman already ended by this time. It was like the late 90s.
Well, Batman the Animated Series was 92. It went on until 95, I think. And there's also Superman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures going on. And the new Batman Adventures was 97, I think.
Why would he want to develop a new superhero show when he's already doing all these other ones? Well, I can
I don't know.
understand that
Maybe, I guess. It's just
they
some kind
already,
of
because
reason.
Warner Bros. Already had a lot of those. But I think that if they kind of combined like the comedy of Animaniacs with like the Bruce Timm direction, it made it kind of like a superhero parody kind of thing, where they still have the action adventure, but also the comedy, kind of like Darkwing Duck, but like more edgy because it's Warner Bros. And hip and epic, right? Yo.
Sure.
Anyways, I think they did something more like that, it would be better. But here, the show is just too random and too unfocused. And I don't think that I can really recommend it, even if I can remember some really funny sketches, which honestly I can't, because there's basically just like a random line or something. But even in the shorter sketches, and especially in the longer episodes, they're just random jokes that just go on for too long. They feel like they could have been their own sketches themselves, but then they just aren't. So it's just pointless. And I think that what really made this show suffer was that there wasn't really that many other characters. I mean, there are a few other characters, but on Animaniacs, you could tell they had a lot of ideas for certain characters. And even in the shorter, smaller segments, they could use them to fill in like, well, what would otherwise be just some generic character. But here it's basically just Freakazoid most of the time, and sometimes they just do really weird one-off ideas, like one about lawn gnomes who are like stoned in the daytime, like how a lawn gnome actually is. But then nighttime they come alive, have their own adventures, like a mystical fantasy society. That is just so complete. That is just, it's a strange, interesting premise. And it's just so disconnected from everything else. It's not really even that much of a comedy. It's more like a fantasy adventure type of thing. And I wonder if there's like some random idea that someone had that wasn't turned into a full show or whatever, so they just plugged it in the Freakazoid. And it's just so completely different, but nothing else in the whole show is like that. It's just a Johnny Quest parody written by Tom Minton that was for Animaniacs, but it got rejected for some reason. And it ended up being in Freakazoid, which also has the voice of Scott Menville. So that's a little Easter egg. And I never seen Johnny Quest. And I remember I watched the Toby Danger episode once, and I think it was pretty decent. But I think that like what it needed was like some kind of actual direction. So overall, I would say that the show just isn't that good, and well, it's
Well,
just
except the theme song. The theme song is great, as all the
yeah.
theme songs from this time are. But nothing else about the show really stands out to me specifically, like any specific joke or scene or anything.
You could just mention.
So, you've seen Road Rovers, right?
I watched like the first three episodes, and it was pretty good, I guess. I mean, it's not anything super amazing or anything, but I mean, it's not like people get mad if we don't bring it up. But
We bring up all the other shows like Hysteria, which I've seen like some little bits and pieces from. And Hysteria most exists as an educational show. Obviously, it didn't have the same budget as all those other shows. And I don't know. I don't know if Tom Ruger had like some kind of specific reason he wanted to make this, or he was just forced to by the EI requirements. But Hysteria is a pretty fun show. It's basically educational. Most of the songs, I remember like a couple of the songs. I like the Pepper song. You know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I'm talking about.
Also, the Julius Caesar song about him being stabbed in the back. I liked that one. I don't know if like anyone even knows what I'm talking about. I don't know why I make all these specific Hysteria references. But the show, for what it is, a little educational thing, it's pretty decent, although it does feel more like it's geared towards kids, with all the annoying screaming character and the baby who's shitting himself, making horrifying faces and noises, and just being a horrifying character all around. But it feels more like it's geared towards kids, which I guess it is because it's supposed to be educational, but it doesn't have that witty, biting satire that Animaniacs does. Well, it does sometimes, but sometimes it's just. Well, basically, it's just to be educational, so there's no point in me really talking about it in this way. But basically, not to say it's not worth watching, but it is educational, so you know what kind of things you're going to be getting into if you decide to watch it. It's 4:44 in the morning, so you're going to continue this. That's kind of a later date talking about the Looney Tunes shows with Tasmania and your favorites, First Three Mysteries.
The later date.
What is this reference?
What is it? We determined to delete it.
Stop.